Breaking news, folks. The governor of Nebraska has just announced, I have it here in my hand, that he is going to sign the permitless carry bill, making Nebraska the 27th state in America to recognize constitutional carry or permitless carry. This is a huge deal, and not for all the obvious reasons that you might think. Stand by. We're going to talk about it when we get back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Down, a proud American gun and a constitutional attorney, member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, and New York Times bestselling author. If you have not subscribed to the Four Boxes Down, our Second Amendment channel, please do so. Show your love for the right to keep and bear arms. Okay, folks, huge breaking news. You may have heard this somewhere else, but the governor of Nebraska is signing the bill enacted by the unicameral legislature out there. Nebraska is a little unusual that they don't have two houses, like a House and a Senate. They have a single legislative body. It enacted a permitless carry bill, which the governor is going to sign. Governor Jim Pillen is going to sign this bill. This is huge news. This will make it the 27th. Nebraska will be the 27th state in the union to recognize permitless carry, meaning you can carry a gun in that state without any kind of permit at all. Sometimes this is referred to as constitutional carry. Now, I want to tell you why this is huge news. Obviously, it's huge news every time we expand freedom in America. I like to call this the restoration of the right to keep and bear arms as we continue this process of restoring our rights that never should have been taken away from us by certain jurisdictions. So that is good news. But there's other things I want to talk about that are not as obvious. To begin with, obviously, congratulations to our fellow gun owners in the state of Nebraska. Wonderful news, great job out there. It's wonderful that you've made this the 27th state to have permitless carry. But there's a lot of other good things out of this, not just for our brothers and sisters in Nebraska. The other reason why this is great news is it reduces the possibility, which I think is never going to happen, but it reduces the possibility of any efforts to revoke or get rid of or amend the Constitution to remove the Second Amendment. It makes it even more impossible than ever before because more and more states continue to recognize permitless carry. Beyond this, every state that recognizes permitless carry is a one-way ratchet toward freedom. And what I mean by this is in American life, there's no instance in the 20th century where a state has gone to permitless carry of handguns, and you can carry a gun in public without a license for self-defense or any lawful purposes. There's no instance where any state has gone that direction, expanded that individual freedom, and then subsequently gone back, meaning it's a one-way ratchet toward more freedom in terms of the right to keep and bear arms, and it doesn't ratchet backwards. So I think that's because once people have freedom, they don't readily give it up. Once they're used to something, they don't readily give it up. So once people are used to permitless carry in a particular state, they're not going to readily give it up. And now we're at 27 states out of 50. This is very good, and I think the trend could continue. I think it's possible. There are people out there who may be better at this than I am, but I could certainly see a situation where the states of North Carolina and maybe South Carolina between now and the end of the year adopt such things. Only time will tell. But obviously there is trends in both South Carolina and North Carolina toward a permitless carry regime, but they're not there yet. I'll be curious to see if we get there. That would be very interesting. But right now, with Nebraska, we have 27 states. Beyond that, every state that adopts this, it eliminates this parade of horribles argument that the anti-gunners like to make all around the country, where if you allow people to permitless carry, you increase the odds of people engaging in road rage incidents where there's a fender bender, and next thing you know, it's the OK Corral. None of that happens empirically. If you kind of look at these states that have gone to permitless carry, people are generally happy with it, and many people, including law enforcement, admit that the parade of horribles they thought would occur does not occur because, again, the law-abiding Americans who want to carry guns for self-defense are not the problem. We know it's the gangbangers and the perennial criminals that simply are going to commit crimes regardless of what the law says about guns one way or another. They're just professional criminals and they're violent thugs, and you're never going to change them with any kind of so-called gun control law. And obviously, when you eliminate the parade of horribles, it makes it easier for other states to adopt permitless carry because they can look at these other states to say, hey, if you look at all these other 27 states, it's only been good that's come out of it, so we should adopt it. So it makes it easier to expand constitutional or permitless carry to other states just by virtue of the positive experiences these other states have. The last point I want to make about why Nebraska becoming the 27th state to adopt permitless carry and more on the horizon, is this actually will help us in the courts. If you go back and you look at the oral argument in NYSERPA versus Bruin, for example, Justice Kavanaugh, at oral argument, asked the state of New York the following. He asked something along the lines of, 43 states have shall issue or permitless carry. Doesn't seem to be any kind of a huge problem in those states, so why can't the 6 outlier, meaning these 6 minority states like New York, why can't they go to shall issue or something like that? What's the big deal? And that was where Justice Kavanaugh's head was at. He's like, I don't understand, why are these 6 jurisdictions bending over backwards to take away Second Amendment rights? And he was puzzled by this at oral argument, and of course, he wrote a very favorable concurrence, and that was a 6-3 victory for the Second Amendment. Now, the reason why, and this is the sort of geeky thing I want to talk about. Now, the reason why every state that becomes permitless carry does something else for us is it benefits us in the courts. Now, yes, it's true that the Second Amendment is to be interpreted by the text and any historical analog laws, if there are any, to justify gun control laws. That's all true. But we must always remember the judges are people too, and they don't want to feel or think that they're doing something that's going to endanger the lives unnecessarily or anything like that, which of course they're not by expanding the Second Amendment. They're doing just the reverse. They're saving lives by expanding the Second Amendment, by allowing people to protect themselves with guns, no different than our political elites, our Hollywood elites, our religious elites all get to do. We should have that right as well, and not just the elites in society. And the Supreme Court recognizes this, and they've made references to this. But I want to bring to your attention a Supreme Court line of precedent that is not often talked about. And basically what the Supreme Court precedents are says that if you have a situation where most of the country is already recognizing something as a constitutional right, and there's a few outlier jurisdictions. Now, the word outlier just means the minority, a distinct minority of jurisdictions. Then the Supreme Court has a history of stepping in favor of freedom, right, and stepping in and saying that, you outlier jurisdictions need to get in line with the rest of the country in terms of respecting these fundamental rights or these rights in some way. A couple examples of this was, Griswold versus Connecticut. Connecticut was one of the very few states that had outlawed or still had a ban on contraceptives in the book. The Supreme Court in Griswold versus Connecticut, the name of the case was Griswold versus Connecticut, came in and struck down the law in Connecticut on contraceptives because, again, I think one of the things, it was an unusual outlier jurisdiction. Likewise, if you look at the law that struck down anti-sodomy statutes, the case was Lawrence versus Texas. The Supreme Court, again, took note the fact that there was, I think, only 1 or 2 states that continued to have laws outlawing sodomy on the books. And in the Supreme Court decision of Lawrence versus Texas, it stepped in and says, no more outlier jurisdictions. This is unconstitutional. It's not allowed. And they struck it down. Now, the reason why I mentioned the Griswold case and the Lawrence case is because I wrote all about this in an article, a very geeky article in the Catholic University Law Review. I'm not going to bore you with even the title of this article, but I will link to it down below. But essentially, I talk about how the Supreme Court enforces nationally accepted norms when it comes to constitutional rights against outlier jurisdictions in certain instances. And while they've done it in other instances where I think the fundamental constitutional rights at issue were, shall we say, on more thin ice than the Second Amendment, it seems to me that over time, one of the ways we can knock out shall issue permitting regimes is to the extent these shall issue regimes continue to become more and more of the minority jurisdictions when it comes to the right to carry guns outside the home in public, the more these become outlier jurisdictions or minority jurisdictions, the greater the likely is the Supreme Court will apply this precedent that I write about in this Catholic University Law Review article, which I'll post down below, about how they will step in and knock out things like shall issue permitting regimes. Now, I'm not saying they're going to go after shall issue permitting regimes tomorrow. I think, as I mentioned in other videos, the Supreme Court wants to take on other Second Amendment issues first before they get to these permitting regimes. But if you look 4 or 5 years down the road, a situation where you have 30 states that have permitless carry regimes, and you get a case before the U.S. Supreme Court raising the issue of whether or not shall issue or permitting regimes at all are constitutional, it will increase our odds of knocking out all permitting regimes for carry across the country if we can show that it is only a distinct terrible minority that doesn't respect these rights to keep and bear arms, that will increase our odds. Because I do think if you look at Nyserpa versus Bruin, it was pretty clear that Justice Kavanaugh took note the fact that there were only 6 outlier jurisdictions that refused to recognize shall issue permitting regimes or permitless carry regimes, and instead required may issue, or you had to demonstrate that you had a specific need to carry a gun. And that clearly was something the Supreme Court, including Justice Kavanaugh, took note of. So to the extent we can continue to expand permitless carry across the country, not only does that do good for Americans because they get to carry guns, which is important for public safety and respects the Constitution, it also reduces the chance even more to zero, if it could be more than zero, of amending the Second Amendment to get rid of the Second Amendment. It eliminates any risk of these arguments about parade of horribles if you let people and trust people have guns. It eliminates that because every state that adopts this, they realize that you don't have this parade of horribles. And last but not least, every state that adopts this increases the risk, in my view, in court that the Supreme Court will eventually get rid of all permitting regimes when it comes to handguns or firearms. And I think that will be a good outcome. Now, we're not all the way there yet, but certainly 27 states is the majority of states, and I think we can get more and more, and ultimately this will help in court in all respects. But only time will tell. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, congratulations, Nebraska, and look forward to seeing you all again here at the Four Boxes Diner. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. We'll see you again soon at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.